Have you guys ever seen Luther the Anger Translator on Key and Peele? If you haven't had a chance to see it, you need to go watch it. I'd clip it here and let you see it, but I'll probably get copyright claimed, and I had some bad experience with that recently. Go check it out. So basically what it is, it's Obama is the character they're playing, and he's got his measured, typical Obama speak, and then he has a translator who's wild and over the top and shouting and angry, which is the point, saying what Obama really wants to say. It's hysterically funny. You need to go see it. And the reason I'm bringing it up is I feel like I need to be the anger translator for Andrew Hiller. And let me explain. Before I do that, do me a favor, go hit the subscribe button as well as the notifications bell so you don't miss any future content here on the channel. So here's why Hiller needs an anger translator. He is making some fantastic points to CrossFit on areas that absolutely need to be addressed. And I feel like the points are being missed because CrossFit is so caught up in the tone, for lack of a better term, or the way in which it's being delivered, that they would prefer to be morally right than to be actually right and fix the issues at hand. And I'm going to explain what some of those issues are as we go through this and just give some insight as to what I think is happening and how CrossFit should address what Andrew is very wisely bringing up. Now, for those of you that haven't been following Andrew's channel, Hiller Fit, you need to go subscribe to it and follow it. And it's a really interesting channel. Well, where CrossFit's concerned, they seem to be really upset with the way he's handling them and the way that he's discussing the business of CrossFit. Most recently, we've seen it in two segments on YouTube. One came in Dave's weekend review, or Dave Castro, who's the head of the CrossFit Games. And the second one came on Coffee Pods and Wads when Peter, the host, was interviewing Don Fall, who is the CEO of CrossFit. So what's interesting in both of those is that Dave and Don, and I'll link the shows here so you guys can see them in full. In both cases, they fully admit that they haven't watched all of his content, but they've watched enough to have an opinion on it, which is fair. I don't watch all content. I typically can watch enough of a TV show, for instance, to decide whether I like it or don't like it. But they also have a similar approach that they think that what he is doing is out of bounds and not within the realm of decency. Don defined it as problematic, negative, and unhelpful. He described it as personal attacks and that it had an explicit focus on the negative, independent of issues, all of which I disagree with. It's obviously his right to feel that way. And he made a good point that you can be critical of something and still be constructive, and that's valid. That's what I try to do here, but it's also not necessarily the nature of YouTube. And I think our problem is we have our own little biases that if someone yells at me, well, I'm just going to ignore it. And I think that's what's happening here, is that they're hearing Andrew's criticism of them in what is arguably a pretty harsh way and taking it as negative as opposed to what it is, which is a gift. I know being yelled at doesn't feel like a gift, but feedback is a gift. When someone shows you a flaw, you then have a choice. You can fix it or you can ignore it. Most flaws in my life, I just ignore them, but you can absolutely take that moment and make a decision. And that's the decision that's been given to them, or the gift that's been given to them, is what do you want to do with this? So the thing they seem to be most keyed up about right now is Hiller recently did a video about this woman, Annette, who sounds like she's the head of HR at CrossFit headquarters. And she did a public podcast describing hiring practices around people of color. And we're not going to get into the details of those specific practices, but Andrew put a spotlight on that, played her own words, and allowed people to form an opinion on it. And this is obviously someone who, according to Dave and to Don, had no intention to be pulled into the public eye. Earlier in the year, Andrew did a very similar thing with Josh Grau, who had been hired and doesn't work at CrossFit now, by pulling some of his social media content and sharing it with his following. And then did the same thing with Jay DeCoons, who also works at CrossFit headquarters and is a great guy, and pulled some YouTube content that he had of an interview Jay had done talking about CrossFit, and he shared that with the community. Now, what I would point out here is what Hiller is doing is he's taking the own words of these employees and sharing them with his community, and in some cases opining over it, like I'm doing here, but he's still sharing their words pulled from a public forum. It wasn't as if he's, stealing downloaded material from their phone or from their, laptops or computers. He's taking easily accessible social media and sharing it with the CrossFit community at large. That's obviously very tight-knit and very concerned about the direction of CrossFit itself. And so the question at hand is that fair behavior? Dave defined that as unfair to go after employees that had no intention to be pulled into the public eye. And what I would tell CrossFit, this is the juncture that you're at right now, is you have to decide, are we going to just link arms with these employees and say, oh, I'm sorry you feel bad, that your feelings are hurt about this? Or are we going to address the problem that is very clearly broken within our company? The problem is you either don't have or you don't enforce a social media policy. I can't imagine in my right mind a corporation the size of CrossFit that doesn't do social media background checks. Here's an example. I don't do social media for a living, but I do a lot. You guys all know I do it a lot. Every single time I send a tweet or a post or a meme, I quite literally think to myself, is this going to be the very last one I do in my professional career? Because everything I post online is searchable and accessible by the people I work for. I also recognize that every single thing that I post online could be used against me in a future interview. So imagine for a second, there's a job that opens up in finance. I have to meet with the CEO to interview for it. I'm sitting across from the CEO and he says to me, Mr. Willie, your resume looks great. You've got 25 years in banking. You've won so many awards. This is terrific. Hey, let me ask you a question. I was looking at your Twitter and I noticed a few months back you tweeted, fuck these guys, I'm out of here to watch semifinals. What was that about? Now, I know that sounds silly, but it's a public forum. And trust me when I tell you, my employers know every bit about the work that I do online. They know everything that I post, and there are some guideposts that I have to stay within. And so my question is how does a company the size of CrossFit that keeps getting ravaged by Hiller around their hires not have a process in place where you're doing social media background checks? Now, none of these employees, to my knowledge, has anything online that is scandalous, although some of it has certainly raised some eyebrows within CrossFit. But what happens when you get the next one that does have something scandalous that you didn't check? And now you have a brand reputation problem. You guys act like this entire company didn't almost go belly up on a tweet. The only reason Don is in his job today, when Dave, you were in the job for about 30 minutes, is because of a poorly worded tweet. So how is there no social media policy at this point that you guys are either enforcing or using for background checks? Hiller has clearly poked holes in your system 3 times now by my count, and I'm sure there's going to be more. And so the question you guys should be asking isn't, why is Hiller attacking us? The question you should be asking is, what can we do better based on this situation moving forward? It's a really simple process. The second question that you need to be asking, and you should be asking this a lot, is why are so many internal employees that work at CrossFit so willing to leak information that could be potentially harmful or embarrassing to the organization? You can look no farther than how quickly Hiller gets his information. You can look at some of the questions in that great interview that Peter did that very clearly came from inside sources. And I can tell you from personal experience, on multiple situations, I've been sent stuff from inside sources that I've never used. I'll give you a very specific example. You guys lost your mind when Hiller did his post on Jada Coates, who again, I love the guy, super nice dude, but none of us knew him when he started. And within minutes of you guys hiring him, I received a text message with the video of him talking about CrossFit being dangerous. The text message came from a friend who got it from someone who sits on your affiliate board. It doesn't get much more internal than that. And my point is if the people that are making decisions for your company are so willing to leak this information to the people that they'll think blow it up, you have to start asking yourself, do we have the right people that work here? Do we have the internal culture that makes them want to win? And the third and most important one is why. Like, you need to figure out why the internal employees are so willing to let this continue to happen. I had Don on my show back in February, and we talked quite a bit about culture. And part of that conversation was around, once we make a decision, we're going to lock arms and all stick together. And I would tell you, based on this current behavior, that's absolutely not happening, and it's something that needs to be addressed very quickly. I will say as I wrap this up that I think Don is a terrific leader, and I think he has the best of intentions and wants the best for the company. But I think they all need to take a minute, including Don, and start listening more and asking more questions. And maybe instead of balling up your fist, reach out your hand and ask for help.